Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is the Kiyoshi Kurosawa film Doppelganger, starring Koji Yakusho, from 2003, not the 1993 Drew Barrymore film of the same name. This is a really interesting film. We've seen lots of films about doubles and twins and multiple roles. I might actually do a video at some point on the number of films with multiple roles for the same actor. But this one takes a little bit of a left turn, which you're either going to go with and enjoy, or it's probably going to annoy you. So you have to remember, in 2003, Kiyoshi Kurosawa was famous for his films in the J-horror cycle that started with Cure in 1997 and Pulse and Seance, the TV movie, which also all starred Koji Yakusho. So there's kind of previous, when you go into Doppelganger, you are expecting a J-horror, and the cover and some of the posters would suggest that it's another J-horror. But it's a little bit more than that. It starts off in typical J-horror manner. We meet a woman played by Hiromi Naisaku, who sees her brother out near a store. She comes home and he's home, and she asks him, how did he get home so quickly? And he's like, haven't been out. So that's kind of the first hint that something odd's going on. And then she gets a phone call from the police saying that her brother has just died in hospital. And she's like, well, he's in the house, you must be mistaken because he's here. And she goes to look for him and she can't find him. And again, Kurosawa uses the same kind of setup. It's shot very flatly. He uses kind of medium shots, very still camera. He'll open the frame up to one side of characters' heads or behind them. So it's the kind of standard J-horror palette that we got used to seeing in the late 90s, early 2000s. But her brother's doppelganger, or what we come to know as his doppelganger, is still in the house. And he's writing the book that her brother was going to start but never kind of got around to, or didn't put that much effort into. So it's the suggestion that the doppelganger is the best version of you. It's the version that actually follows through with things. And this drove her brother to suicide. So she's living with the doppelganger in the house, and he just sits and writes all day. So then we're introduced to Koji Yashuko's character, Hayasaki, who is a kind of genius inventor who's struggling and falling. He's kind of got a mental block with he's designing an artificial body, which is essentially a wheelchair where you kind of hide your arms, and you almost will the robotic arms to do things for you. So they're having experiments with like cracking an egg and putting it into a bowl, things like that. but he's struggling, he's not quite there. He did invent, I think it's a pacemaker that brought the company in lots of money, so he's kind of not resting on his laurels, but he has enough kind of goodwill stored from the company that he can work on this artificial body that he's struggling with. And then he starts seeing his doppelganger, and his doppelganger comes into the house in a very effective scene. So, kind of so far, so J-horror, and his doppelganger, again, he does the things that Hayasaki in normal life wouldn't do. So he gets money for him to help out his research. The lab that he works is wrecked by one of the Hayasakis, and he ends up getting fired. So he, or the pair of them, start working in his apartment. One of them hires a character called Kimishima to help out with the experiments. But it's an interesting idea because, again, it's about the id and the superego and the ego, about the things that you wouldn't do but your doppelganger will do for you. Obviously this goes to extreme measures. The lines obviously get blurred between the quote-unquote good Hayasaki and the bad Hayasaki. So you could kind of say, well, so far, so good. We've seen it kind of before. But Kurosawa does a nice thing of he uses split screen to show the two Hayasaki characters and what one of them's doing while the other one is doing something else. So instead of cutting between the two, he has them both on screen at the same time while they're away doing different things, which is a nice touch. At this point it gets closer to the woman whose brother killed himself. So her brother's doppelganger wants to move out because he no longer needs the sister. But one of the Hayasakis sorts him out, and then we get closer to the finishing of the project. You can smoke cigarettes with it. The sister of the doppelganger, she comes along and helps because at this point they're in a warehouse, or kind of an abandoned factory, very much kind of like The Fly, Cronenberg's Fly kind of set. And he's leaves the city to sell his artificial body invention to a company. And this is where the film changes a bit. When they're out on the road in the forest, it changes from a fairly oppressive, claustrophobic environment to a kind of wide open spaces, lots of green grass and forests, as Hayasaki and Kimishima and the woman drive to this factory to sell his invention. Across the way, he's met his old boss, who's also been fired for embezzlement, and his old boss wants to buy the invention off him. So he's always kind of putting his car across the road to stop them, to try and convince them to buy it for 5 million yen or 20 million yen. I'm not really going to say much more about the road trip part of the film because it does get a little bit different. The end is a wonderful Raiders of the Lost Ark homage, shall we say. Its tone changes. So again, it changes from this kind of serious, claustrophobic, using the tropes of J-horror, to something a little bit different near the end of the film. Again, if like me, you just go with it, it'll probably put a smile on your face. If you don't go with it and you feel like it's unsatisfying, or you feel like you've been duped a little bit, you probably won't enjoy it as much. But I found it to be a wonderful little film. Hopefully one day we'll get a Blu-ray release, but please let me know in the comments if there is a Blu-ray release. But I couldn't find one. I mean, there's probably one in Japan, but it might just be Japanese only language. Yeah, another wonderful little Kiyoshi Kurosawa film. I do have a bunch of his films in the backlog. And again, another wonderful performance by Koji Yakusho, who obviously has worked with Kurosawa. He did a couple of the Miike 13 Assassins and his Harakiri remake. He was in Koreeda's Third Murder. He's a veteran actor who's worked with Sia and Sono as well, I think. He's worked with a bunch of directors, and he's wonderful in this, again, because it's the bad, or the doppelganger, Hayasaki. He doesn't give a moustache twirling performance or anything like that. You can tell there's a difference between the two of them, but as with all these kind of films, later on in the film the line gets blurred about who's who. There's a kind of whistling motif that the doppelganger whistles, which again is just another little clue as when the characters perhaps merge or don't merge. So there's lots of little details. Again, the pacing is kind of typical in Kiyoshi Kurosawa films that I've seen. Again, if you're coming to this without having seen kind of J-horror films or just Japanese films in general, then the pace might seem a little slow, but it's done so well that again you're hooked within the first 10 minutes. Again, I also love the fact, spoiler alert, that there's no explanation for it. There's no character that Hayasaki meets that has experience of this situation and explains why it's all happened, which again I think filmmakers should do more often. Just not have an explanation for things happening. We don't need to know why this is happening. It's just happened, and that's all you need to just deal with it. So I'd highly recommend Doppelganger. If you're familiar with Kiyoshi Kurosawa's work, you'll probably like it. But again, let me know in the comments if you've seen Doppelganger before, what you think of it, what you thought of the last 15 minutes. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. And on that bombshell, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying thanks for watching, and farewell.